begin tonight with a safety and security update to a First Alert 6 investigation. This former Nebraska brain surgeon awaiting trial for sexual assault of a child wants to plead insanity.
The original charges go back more than 2 years. Travis Tierney was one of several men accused of repeatedly sneaking into the basement of a West Omaha home to have sex with a 15-year-old.
We wanted to know what happens now. Last month, the Douglas County District Court judge stripped Dr. Travis Tierney of $75,000 he posted to get out of jail before trial. He wasn't supposed to travel out of Douglas County. Investigators found he had flown to Arizona. Only First Alert 6 is there when a fugitive team picked him up at the airport. For 9 months, his criminal case was in limbo. He was being examined by state psychiatrists to determine whether he's competent for trial. In January, they decided he was. Fast forward to this week. First Alert 6 has learned his attorney plans to rely on the defense of not responsible by reason of insanity. A judge has ordered doctors at the Lincoln Regional Center to examine whether Tierney was insane at the time of the alleged crimes. Investigators have accused him of sneaking into a West Omaha home 3 weekends in a row to have sex with a 15-year-old in the spring of 2024. Okay, so what's the difference between already being found competent to stand trial and an insanity defense? Here's what the experts told me tonight. Now, competency is about whether one can understand the legal proceedings and really participate in their defense at the time of the examination. Not responsible by reason of insanity goes back to when the alleged crime occurred. So psychiatrists must determine whether Travis Tierney could distinguish between right and wrong at the time of the incident, or if a mental illness prevented him from knowing and understanding what he was doing. We're probably months away from knowing that answer.